Boring bits of being a ruler. It was a few days after the two new rulers of the Re-Estais were crowned. The citizens of the country seemed to be quite pleased with their new rulers, already anticipating great things from them. Despite being a foreigner, Arthur was welcomed by the citizens. This was mostly due to his deeds, his accomplishments not only in the city of Yggdrassil during the undead incident but in being instrumental to the downfall of Eight Fingers, and his exploits in the recent past were still a hot topic. All these factors helped in making the citizens overlook the fact he was not born or raised in the Re-Estais kingdom. Of course there were some detractors to his status as a foreigner king, but the majority did not care and only hoped for a great future for themselves and the kingdom. At present, the new king and queen were at a meeting, one that was mildly important to the country but still important. Arthur laid his chin on top of Renner's shoulder as he held her body close and smelled her hair. The queen sat on his lap, doing his best to ignore whatever he was doing. However, the people in the room with them couldn't help but feel that it was a bit inappropriate, but of course, they could say nothing. "I say, brother-in-law, you're quite handsy on my sister there." Nazzarick was the one who spoke. Among the people in the room, he was the only one who could comment, as everyone else was either not high enough in social standing or was afraid of Arthur. Of course, his words were ignored by both Renner and Arthur. In the room with them was Gzefstranov standing right beside Renner. Marquis Rivayan was sitting beside Nazzarick on the couch. The two had returned from the Baharuth Empire. On their left side on another couch were two people that were not of noble origin. One of them was a woman, Hilma Signos, former head of Eight Fingers, and the second individual was a young man who seemed to be as stiff as a board, unable to relax as he occupied the same space as both the king and queen. This, of course, was the young alchemist, Enfire Bearer, and he was here for reasons unknown to him. "Ms. Hilma, you're the head of this new Goldilocks group, correct?" Renner questioned. Of course, she knew the answer to that question. This was just theatrics to fool the other people in the room. Now that Arthur and Renner were the rulers of the kingdom, they were able to make changes in the country, and one such change was entrusting the production of weapons to the former Eight Fingers. "That is correct, Your Majesty." Hilma agreed. The people in the room were not familiar with her, but they did know of the fact that during the war with Baharuth, it was this Goldilocks group that was supposed to provide weapons if Arthur hadn't promptly ended the war before it barely began. According to some rumors, your group was supposed to be the ones in charge of giving the Re-Estais kingdom weapons during the war, but since it ended so quickly you never got the chance. Renner expressed that Marquis Rivayan was the first to realize what the new queen was getting at, but decided to wait till she was done to voice his concerns. "Can you explain to everyone in the room what your company does and can do for the kingdom?" the queen asked. Obviously, to both Renner, Arthur and Hilma, this was an unnecessary meeting. However, suddenly, entrusting the country's weapon production to a company of unknown origin wouldn't be accepted by the nobles, hence why Nazzarick and Marquis Rivayan had to be present. "Of course, Your Majesty, my Goldilocks group." Hilma went on to explain what her company specialized in. It was practically a sales pitch, with her explaining everything her group does, from weapons production to potion manufacturing, even directing attention to Enfire so that everyone is aware that they have a skilled, trustworthy pharmacist. "So Renner is now queen, huh?" Gagaron asked with a bit of curious wonder in its tone. She didn't really need an answer to her question, as it was more of an acknowledgement of a fact rather than an actual question. "Guess she's no longer a princess, it's gonna be weird calling her Queen Renner." Evely answered. She too felt a bit curious about Renner as queen, much like the rest of her comrades, although neither of them doubted that the former princess would no doubt make for a good queen. The members of Blue Roses were still within the castle walls, enjoying some leisurely time at a bar that was typically used by the knights either after training or when their guard duty was over for the day. Gagaron had a full tankard of mead. The twins were engaged in some type of game with the other knights in the room with them. Evely had been enjoying some reading before Gagaron spoke, forcing a response out of her. Lachias, on the other hand, was occupied by something else. As such, she was deep in her thoughts. "What do you think about his proposal?" "You mean Arthur's proposal about being knights of his round table?" Gagaron gave a nod and Evely hummed in contemplation. The newly crowned king had given the members of Blue Rose an attractive proposal. Apparently, he was starting a new knight order that he himself would be a part of. This new order would consist of only about 12 knights, 12 official members with each their army of troops. Gazef and Brain were already pretty much on board with it, and only about 9 member slots were left. I mean, we're adventurers. Why would we want something like that? Being a knight means following rules and dealing with noble asshats all the time sounds like a pain. Gagaron spoke her thoughts while Evely was still thinking. An adventurer's job is to kill monsters and sell their parts, not to listen to nobles and wear fancy clothes. Gagaron, in particular, likes the rough ruggedness of being an adventurer. Not necessarily. Arthur didn't say much about what being part of this Knight Order of his entailed. He did say it wouldn't change much from our current lifestyle. She expressed, and Gagaron found herself a bit perplexed as she had figured Evely would agree with her. What do you think about this, Lachias? Should we become knights and accept Arthur's offer? Gagaron quickly sought support from their leader, but unfortunately, Lachias' mind was elsewhere. She wasn't technically thinking about anything but rather was in a state of both anticipation and anxiety. It's been more than a week since Arthur and Renner were crowned as king and queen, and in that time, she received little word about the issue they were discussing before Arthur's crowning, and that made her nervous as she was essentially stuck in waiting mode. Never seen her this absent-minded before. Evely commented as she witnessed Lachias not respond to Gagaron's question. Yeah, I think Arthur broke her. Gagaron concurred, and the two decided not to bother Lachias for the time being, at least not for things that weren't. I heard you guys, I'm not absent-minded, I was just thinking, and Arthur didn't break. Yeah, but I'm sure you'd like him too, wouldn't you? Gagaron teased, causing a light blush to grace the cheeks of their leader and causing Evely to snicker in amusement. Oh, shut up. Anyone watching Solo Leveling? Or Sakamoto Days? 7 comments 0 vote. First meeting. The time of day was around afternoon, just about an hour past high noon, and it was just a normal everyday for everyone else within the capital of the Riestais kingdom. It was during this normal day that a cloaked figure walked the streets of the capital, eliciting states and exclamations of amazement from the citizens. The strange individual wore a cloak, but it did nothing to hide her face, and the citizens were able to see the ethereal, otherworldly beauty of the individual. Her beautiful pale skin resembled porcelain, and her beautiful eyes portrayed an indifferent gaze that saw the regular folk as nothing. All who saw her could by her gaze mattered little to her. There were exclamations of amazement and appreciation of the beauty that walked the streets of the capital, with a few already comparing the beauty of the current queen to this new stranger. Antellin made her way towards the royal castle of the Riestais kingdom. She wasn't in a hurry. As such, her gait was calm and poised as she walked. There was no underlying anxiety or paranoia of being attacked as she was confident in her power. Zeshi had no intention of hiding her identity. However, she still wore the cloak anyway, mostly to hide her ears. She no doubt believed her ears would be met with the same disgust in this kingdom, similar to the slain theocracy. Her belief would not be wrong. The theocracy's human supremacist thought has affected the Riestais kingdom severely. However, the demi-human hate is split about 60-40ths, with the majority being mostly ambivalent to demi-humans. It didn't take long before Zeshi was close to the castle. However, before she took a step, she halted and thought. What to do? She questioned herself. The point of her journey was mostly to test Arthur and see if he had what it took to help her in her quest to kill the Elf King. However, now that she was close, she reconsidered her approach. The approach is to attack him, find out he's strong enough, and then have baby-making sex with him. It was simple and straightforward. However, perhaps it might not be the best approach. Not to mention that he probably has a grudge because of last time. Well, if he does have a grudge, that just means he'll go all out. She concluded and continued to move towards the castle. Renner was steadily walking through the halls of the royal palace. She wasn't going to any particular location or room but instead was taking a break from the paperwork with Arthur absent. She had much work. You are aware that it is entirely unnecessary for all three of you to accompany me everywhere. She expressed to the three individuals following her. Forgive us, my queen, but this is an order from His Majesty, we cannot disobey. Gazes answered from her right. Arthur had gone off to the Azarlian mountain range in search of a gold-hoarding dragon. She wasn't worried about his return or danger. However, she did underestimate how protective he would be. So I must be constantly surrounded by your three everywhere I go until he returns. So says the king, we're just following orders. Brain countered and caused Renner to sigh in frustration. It's not like they made things difficult for her or impeded her from doing anything. However, she did feel that Gazef alone would be enough. If I'm being honest, I've been following you around since I pledged my allegiances to him, so this is hardly a change in routine, although I've never had to follow you to the restroom. Edstrom gave her thoughts on the matter. She was trailing a few steps behind the group but was still close enough to make conversation. Gazef gave the woman a glance. The distrust in his eyes was obvious. He had only recently been informed about Edstrom's former occupation and allegiance. It was due to that knowledge that he felt apprehensive about trusting. However, he never voiced his opinion and chose to trust the king's judgment. Am I not your queen? Shouldn't you follow my orders as well? She asked in an attempt to make them feel conflicted. The conversation itself wasn't really important to her as she was simply talking with them for the sake of it. What really bothered her was the fact Arthur departed with Lycius. She would have much rather he go alone instead of with that woman, and now Renner cannot know what the two will get up to in her absence. Lycius is certainly pushing her luck. She thought in mild displeasure, however her thoughts were quickly interrupted as sounds of a group of knights walking towards her direction reached her ears. Her 3 guards were the first to react, with Gazef and Brain quickly moving in front of her. They shared a silent look as they both held their weapons. Her group was already headed towards the exit door of the palace to get some fresh air, as it was easy to tell the knights coming towards their direction came from outside. They waited, and just as predicted, a group of Re-Estais knights rounded the corner and was met with Renner and her entourage. Men, what's the meaning of this? Gazef questioned, with Brain taking a step back and covering Renner from view, while Edstrom got close to Renner and placed a hand on her shoulder. Apologies, General, but there's a guest who was insistent on entering the castle. Gazef was quick to spot the individual the knights were surrounding, with some having their sword pointed at the person. Let us see this guest then. He commanded, and the knights parted and revealed the petite figure of the individual. The moment they laid eyes on her, their bodies tensed up, and they drew their weapons immediately. Edstrom quickly grabbed Renner and opened the distance between herself and the other two. Who are you? Gazef questioned as Brain stood at his side. Both were quick to understand that they were outmatched and would need to work together to have a chance at defeating this individual. No need for alarm, I'm not here to harm anyone, but I am looking to meet your king. Brain and Gazef shared a look. The 2 men had easily picked up the woman's strength from just a glance and were able to determine she was dangerous. However, letting her meet with the king was out of the question. What business do you have with His Majesty? Gazef asked, his brows furrowed and stance ready to fight. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Can I meet him? Sorry, little lady, but the king doesn't have time to meet with random people just because they want to. Brain answered, and Zeshi frowned in displeasure, and the tension in the hallway became thick, forcing both men to tighten their grips on their weapons. Zeshi hadn't wanted to use violence against people who were completely uninvolved in her business. However, she wasn't above using it. I'd rather you not force me to use violence. Neither of you has the power to stop me, just let me see your king. She demanded. There's no need for that. As queen, I can speak to you in his stead. Renner spoke loudly as she removed Edstrom's hand from her person and walked towards the guest. My queen, please stay back. Gazef warned. However, Renner did not heed his warning and continued to walk towards their position. Our guest here has stated she does not wish for things to get violent. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt. She expressed, reaching Gazef, walking past him, and standing before Zeshi, giving her a scrutinizing gaze. Sorry, but I have no interest in you, just direct me to your king. Zeshi voiced with slight frustration. She wasn't here to waste time talking. I'm afraid you can't, as he isn't in the palace at the moment. However, as queen you can discuss your business with me. She explained once again. However, by the looks of things, their guest was not willing to share what she wanted with Arthur, which was a bit frustrating. Where is he? Zeshi asked, her voice carrying a threatening tone. She regretted it bit letting one of the knights hold onto her scythe. It would have made threatening a lot easier. I'm afraid that is not how negotiations work. Tell us something in exchange for the information you want. Oh, sorry, my mistake. This is not a negotiation. Either tell me what I want, or I force it out of you. How about that? It was here that Gazef and Brain thought to attack. Threatening the queen was enough grounds to retaliate. However, Renner quickly signaled them to stop. Renner was always the type to prefer having an advantage. This meant she never went into a negotiation without having a sort of trump card to ensure she got what she wanted. However, at present, there was no advantage, nor could she gain anything aside from probably being killed. Arthur can handle her on his own, and with Lycius's help this woman should be easy to handle. She reasoned. Very well, the Azarlian mountain range, you'll find him there or on his way there. Before Renner could finish her sentence, Zeshi disappeared. She took her scythe, and in an instant, she was gone. Was that a good idea, Your Majesty? Brain voiced while putting his sword in its sheath and heaving a sigh of relief. No, but Arthur can handle himself. She would have killed both of you and everyone here. It was pointless trying to negotiate with her. Renner explained, and as much as the two men didn't wish to admit it, the queen was correct. They would have died if they fought that woman. 1 comments 0 vote. Rematch 1. It looks like we didn't think this through enough. Arthur voiced as he looked at the dense, thick forest before him. Behind him was a carriage stacked with barrels, as well as their supplies. The issue that Arthur was facing now was that the forest that led up to the mountain was dense and thick, and thus making it difficult for a carriage to go through. We can just cut through the forest and make a way. Gagaron sounded behind him, offering the most obvious solution to the problem. That's a solution, but I'd rather we not attract monsters while doing that, plus we don't know if there are inhabitants in the forest. Lachias countered Gagarin's argument. So, even if there is, we can just beat the shit out of them. Gagaron expressed. She didn't see the need to complicate things when simpler solutions existed. However, her leader still sought a more peaceful solution. Tia, can you guys scout out the area? Lachias commanded, and the twins quickly sprung into action, following the command of their leader. Once the twins were out of sight, Evely decided to speak. Or I can just cast fly on the carriage. She said plainly, bringing up the fact that they had completely forgotten they had a mage on their team. However, behind her mask, she had a smirk. Wouldn't that be wasting your magic? We could run into something unexpected here. Lachias advised, there was also the fact that they were going to fight a dragon, so it was best to conserve as much magic as possible. Hearing Lachias' words, Evely visibly deflated. Ha! You thought we forgot about you and planned to guilt trip us, weren't you? Gagaron chuckled at the notion. Evely's avoided eye contact, turning to look away before she responded. I don't know what you're talking about. To be fair, I did forget about her. Arthur admitted as he scratched the back of his head. He hadn't spent much time with Blue Rose, so it was understandable that he had forgotten about her, especially considering Evely was the silent type. Some king you are we sure isn't going to run the kingdom into the ground? Evely asked with a great deal of sarcasm, forcing another chuckle from Gagaron. Despite the disrespectful tone, everyone understood it to be just some lighthearted fun. All right, short stack, truce. Arthur raised his arm up in surrender. Throwing insults was never his strong suit. HMPH, I'll forgive you this one time. The vampire folded her arms in faux displeasure, and Arthur rolled his eyes. Despite how she seemed, Evely was more childish than she let on. Anyway, you guys don't have to worry about me wasting my mana. Evely expressed, and just as she finished her sentence, the twins returned and reported to have found nothing noteworthy, but they did find something else. We found a weapon. Tia announced and brought the wooden axe to Lachias and handed it to her in a very melodramatic fashion. Like a servant presenting a present to a king. Lachias couldn't help but facepalm at such a display and felt a bit embarrassed. I heard some lizardmen tend to come here. It was Evely who spoke, speculating on who the wooden axe might belong to. I am sure lizardmen would have a sort of favorable relationship with a dragon, so it makes sense. Lachias reasoned, and Arthur nodded to her statement, although he didn't really know if lizardmen held a sort of reverence for dragons in this world. It was never stated in the anime. So we can't cut down the trees as that might upset the lizardmen we might possibly run into. Arthur concluded, and Evely proceeded to cart fly on the carriage without needing to be told. Looks like we're going with my plan then. She expressed as the carriage floated above her head. I suppose, let's go then. Arthur commanded, and everyone began to move into the forest. By the way, should we camp or just head straight for the mountain? Arthur asked, and Gagaron answered immediately. If we're going to be fighting dragons, I prefer we camp. I agree, we haven't much of a break in ours. Evely concurred. I think it's for the best too, not to mention it will help us come up with a proper strategy. Lachias remarked, and twins nodded to her words. It seemed reasonable to camp out and rest before a big battle. Although Arthur planned to be the only one to fight, that didn't mean their help would be unnecessary. I guess that's settled, now I'm excited for some hog meat. Gagaron expressed with visible excitement on her face. What is hog meat? Basically just meat of a wild boar, it's just like pork but better. Gagaron answered Arthur's question, and Arthur hummed in curiosity. He's never been one to eat exotic meats, so this might be a good opportunity. Must be good with how excited you seem. I'm telling you, Arthur, you haven't eaten anything if you've yet to eat hog meat. It's incredible how delicious they are. Gagaron expressed with a tone of excitement, already imagining roasting a wild hot over an open campfire. It was something she enjoyed eating ever since her early days as an adventurer. It's true, I had my reservations at first, but once I tasted it, I was surprised by how good it tasted. Evely concurred with her comrade, causing Arthur to hum in consideration of the idea. He turned to look at Lachias, silently asking her if what her comrades were saying was true, and the blonde gave him a nod. He looked at the twins and they just shrugged, not willing to admit that the gorilla actually had good taste in something. I guess it's settled then, we'll hunt some wild boars when we camp out. The newly crowned king expressed, he's never been one to go hunting or camping. He figured the gold wasn't going anywhere, so he'll have time to do that. Great, Gagaron was about to speak when she was quickly cut off by Arthur, who pulled out Excalibur and parried the scythe that aimed to pierce open his skull. Clink. The two blades clashed, and Arthur kicked his opponent in the stomach, sending her flying back. However, Zeshi did a flip mid-air and landed meters away from her foes. Arthur. Lachias, who screamed his name, was immediately cut off by a single gesture of his hand, signaling to her that he would handle this and there was no need to get involved. However, Lachias saw something in his eyes, something she didn't recall seeing ever since she'd met him. The members of Blue Rose found themselves stunned as they saw Arthur displaying anger on his face. In a burst of speed, Arthur launched himself towards Zeshi and reached in no more than a split second. However, the half-elf godkin was ready. She swung her scythe parallel to the ground, aiming to pierce through his torso. Humph! He expressed in mock as he easily parried the attack, forcing Zeshi to be wide open before he delivered a clenched fist to her face. The half-elf groaned in pain as she felt the power behind the attack. Her body was then flung back at breakneck speed and crashed through the trees, and Arthur gave chase. Zeshi used her scythe to slow herself down. Once she did so, she quickly wiped the blood off her nose, and a grin showed itself on her face. Now we're talking. She voiced and looked up, only to see Arthur already before her, his fist already in motion towards her face. What? She thought in both surprise and shock. However, she easily blocked the punch using her scythe, but she felt the power behind the punch, which had forced her feet to dig into the ground. Unfortunately for Zeshi, despite having blocked the attack, Arthur gave her no time for a counterattack as he kicked on the ribs, but before she could be sent flying, he grabbed her scythe and pulled her closer and slammed his head against her face, drawing blood once again. Arthur followed that up with a punch to Zeshi's gut, forcing her mouth open, and wads of saliva spewed out her mouth. The punch to the gut forced her to bend forward, to which Arthur took the opportunity to deliver a knee kick, sending her flying back once more and crashing onto more trees. Holy shit! Gagaron exclaimed, her face gobsmacked as she witnessed the viscousness of Arthur's attacks on their assailant. This was a side of Arthur she's never seen. Holy shit is right, I know he destroyed an army by himself, but I never thought he'd be so merciless and relentless. Evely concurred with her brutish friend, seeing Arthur deliver attacks with such fury made her believe he had some sort of grudge against his current foe. He's not even carrying his sword, he's just beating her ass. Gagaron noted, seeing that Arthur had discarded his sword for the moment and was using his fist to inflict as much damage as he could to his enemy. Lachias could only watch in stupefied amazement while also hearing Tina whisper some nicknames for Arthur and Tia, shutting down all her ideas. Goddammit. He was expecting me. She inwardly thought, but she was wrong. However, to her that was the only explanation for why her ambush didn't work. He had to have expected an attack. She did her best to block, dodge and parry each of the punches with her scythe, but Arthur was relentless, barely giving her a chance to breathe. Zeshi found herself in a corner, only being able to defend herself and her attacks never landing, and each attack she blocked made her arms tingle. However, she did think that was a bad thing. Her opponent was giving it his all. This is what I wanted. She grinned, it was time to put her all in the fight. 5 comments 0 vote. Rematch 2. The members of Blue Rose watched as Arthur battled the unknown attacker, with a viciousness that they'd never witnessed before. Should we help him? Evely questioned as she witnessed the battle, gusts of wind kicking up dust in the air due to the shockwave of each attack from both individuals. I don't think he needs it. Gagaron answered as she grasped her chin, paying careful attention to the battle. She wasn't a professional brawler by any means, but she could tell the way Arthur was fighting was brutish and undisciplined. The man wasn't using any martial arts. He doesn't Let's try and get out of his way. Lachias advised, recognizing that it would be a useless try to help Arthur. The battle between the two continued uninterrupted, Zeshi finally being proactive and counter-attacking. The half-elf dodged Arthur's fist aimed at her face by twirling to his left flank, which was open due to the swing of his fist, and using the moment of her spin to swing her scythe full force, planning to pierce through his waist. However, Arthur expertly dodged by bending his knees forward as well as the top half of his body, evading the attack before he kicked her back multiple meters, opening the distance between them. I knew you would come for me eventually. He uttered those words as he turned around to face her and used ruler's authority to call forth Excalibur back into his hand. Zeshi dusted the dirt off her clothing and wiped the small amount of blood off her lip before she responded to his words. So you were expecting my ambush? No, you're just predictable, now I get to beat your ass to my heart's content. He said before he launched himself at her, hearing his words as he rushed towards her caused her to scoff, welcoming the challenge. Arthur swung a Excalibur at her neck, the wind whistling at the blade cut through the air. However, Zeshi was not so easy to kill. Her scythe intercepted the attack, blocking it, and the clash of steel against steel reverberated throughout the battlefield. With the two weapons having clashed and sparks flying in the air, Zeshi pushed down against Excalibur, using her scythe, forcing the blade to touch the ground before. This opened Arthur's front for attack, and she took the chance. She pulled at the bottom of her scythe's handle and then used the other hand to push, that the head of the scythe swung forward, its bladed bottom edge going for Arthur's neck. However, Arthur didn't jump back or dodge. Instead, he utilized blood venet on his hands before he removed one hand from the grip of Excalibur and halted the swing scythe. The battle halted, both fighters remaining in the position they were in. Thought this was going to be easy? Arthur asked mockingly, his face still portraying an angry frown. He wasn't satisfied yet, not in the least. He wanted to beat her down thoroughly and completely. I've always wanted it to be hard. She responded, and his expression faltered, holding in a chuckle. He was sure she didn't mean it in that way. All right then, I'll show you how hard this can be. He responded, and they separated by jumping back several meters away from each other. This didn't end well for you last time. I don't think that will change. She uttered and took a more relaxed fighting stance. Everything had been going well so far. In terms of power, he was more than adequate, and now she just needed to see if he could survive her strongest attacks. However, as she was scrutinizing Arthur's form, something occurred to her. All this was so she could kill the Elf King, her father. The goal was to find someone stronger than her, have his child, and have that child defeat the Elf King. It was a simple plan, not the best plan but one that she could come up with. However, there were a few problems, the first being that if this man truly is stronger than her, how exactly is he going to convince him to give her an offspring? He certainly isn't thinking about such things considering their last encounter. The second problem was, is it truly fair to birth a child for the purpose of completing a single objective? Zeshi herself has only ever been taught to fight. She was born and bred for the sake of war, and the training her mother put her through was so she could awaken as godkin. Her existence was only ever about the strength she possessed and what that could do for the slain theocracy. Can she truly put her own child through that, despite knowing how terrible such a life would be? No, it's fine, my plan is fine, and it will work. She denied such thoughts and reaffirmed her beliefs. There was no need for her to overthink anything, and everything was fine as it was. The Elf King needed to die. If you think this will go exactly like last time, then you're mistaken. Arthur said, his face showing a smile. His anger had subsided. However, now he was looking forward to defeating her. Should I kill her? He asked himself inwardly. He wanted to kill. He wanted his revenge. However, at the same time, he couldn't help but think about his kingdom. Zeshi would be an excellent servant. I'm so jealous of you, Sung Jinwoo. He thought to himself that if he had the ability of the Shadow Monarch, he could kill Zeshi, get his revenge, and get a powerful soldier. Thinking about it, why didn't he just ask for the Shadow Monarch's abilities? Did his past self think they would be too edgy? Am I being greedy? He questioned himself. However, before he could think further about it, he realized something. That might work, although I hope her mental resilience isn't too strong. He thought before he smiled wickedly. It seemed that he could get his revenge and get a new loyal servant. Oh, is that so? Then I guess you're telling me to go all out then. Zeshi responded as she smiled and began to prepare for her next attack. Since Arthur survived the instant death spell last time, she chose not to even use it and instead chose to use one of her most powerful skills. Don't you dare regret it. Sorry for the delay, I have no excuse. Next chapter Arthur's domain expansion will be revealed. To be continued.